Welcome back, man. It's been a while. It's been a minute. A lot has happened in my life, but I'm finally back to it. And this is the final part of a 3-part series. By the time you're watching this, part 2 will already be up. This is the last part, the roof. Finishing that house. This is how to get into the top 3. So I have notes, obviously, because I didn't memorize the AFI, but when you talk about finishing it, when you go into the top 3, you're talking about ranks E7, E8, and E9. That's your senior NCOs in the U.S. Air Force and Reserve and all the Air Force. The top 3 is your senior NCOs. Now, of course, being part of the top 3, being a senior NCO comes with its own unique responsibilities and challenges, and it's not for everyone, and everybody's not going to make it there. But if that's something you're shooting for and it's something that you aspire to be, I'm going to go over like the AFI bare minimum basic requirements to even be part of the conversation. If you don't meet these, you're not even, to help with getting a seat at the table, you're not getting invited into the room. Now, I'm not going to go over some of the special circumstances. I went over that in the past one as far as like being stepped and having a unit vacancy. This is just what are the bare minimum requirements to even be part of the conversation. And before I go any further, I want you to stop and ask yourself, why are you aspiring to be this? Is it, what are you trying to gain? What's the goal here? What's the reason why? It's important that you be mindful of that as you look at these higher positions, because the higher you go, the less and less it's about you, in my own personal opinion. I've had the opportunity to learn from a lot of chiefs, those who are fantastic and those who are not so fantastic. Seniors as well, even master sergeants. So before you continue down this journey, like this is something you want to aspire to, stop and ask yourself, why? What's the goal here? And if it's you or I or me is how the conversation begins, you're probably not ready. And that's just my own personal opinion, but I don't think that you are approaching this the way that you should be, if that makes sense. So let's just jump right into it. To make E7, which is a master sergeant in the U.S. Air Force, I say U.S. like someone from overseas would be looking at this. I look at my analytics. Ain't nobody overseas looking at this. But you need, at minimum, your 7 skill level. You have to be current for fit to fight, 24 months time and grade, and 8 years time in service. And you got to do NCO Academy. So let's break those down. Your 7 skill level, that means that you're at a supervisory skill level for your job. This is going to vary from one AFSC to another, but you need a minimum your 7 skill level, period. You have to be current for fit to fight. That's just our fitness assessment. You got to be current. You can't be past due. You have to be current. Maybe I'll go into what that means later. 24 months time of grade. You got to spend 2 years as an E6. Bare minimum. 2 years as an E6. So that's what I mean by time and grade, which I went over that before. We're just kind of going through things line by line. 8 years time in service. So theoretically, if you made E6 at 6 years in, you could be an E7 at 8 years in. You only need 8 years time in service, time in the military. But you do have to also complete your non-commissioned officer academy. That's the school that we go to so that we can become senior NCOs. Now you can do in residence, which I highly recommend, and you can do the correspondence. Some people do well with the books. I've heard different views on both. If you have the opportunity to go in residence, I strongly advise that you do. If you just can't do that, or that's not for you, or you don't have the capacity to do that, you can do by correspondence. It's not the same experience, but it's the same information. So however it is that you learn or what's available to you based upon your unit and funding and whatever, those are your 2 options. But I recommend going in residence. To be clear, these are, again, I can't emphasize enough, the bare minimum. This is just enough to start the conversation. And to be honest, if you're a tech looking to become a master and you don't know these things, you're already wrong from Jump Street, in my own personal opinion. If you're at this level, you should know what you need and you should have your ducks in a row. Point blank period, before you even consider asking anyone about it. You need to be able to do your own research and know what the AFI states and where you stand and what you need. Now, to make senior master sergeant with the senior non-commissioned officer, to make senior master sergeant, you can have a 7 or 9 skill level. You do have to possess one of them. You can make senior with a 7. You can make it with a 9. You don't have to have a 9, but you can. Like my career field as an air reporter, our 7 skill level is at, typically you get that when you're a staff sergeant. You can get your 9 skill level as a master sergeant. Typically, you only see your seniors with a 9 skill level, but you can if you're reserve. So like if you're reserve and you're a master sergeant and you've had your 7 level for more than 2 years and your leadership recommends you for it, you can get your 9 level, but that's really specific to my career field, to the area reporters. But you will need a 7 or 9 skill level. Like you can't get it with a 5, which is kind of redundant because you can't become a master sergeant E7 without a 7 level. So, but that's just what the reg says. I'm just kind of reading it verbatim. You gotta be current for fit to fight. Obviously, fitness has to be up to date. 2 years time and grade. You gotta spend at least 2 years as a master sergeant. There's no walking through the ranks 1 year, boom, 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 boom. No, they make sure you gotta spend at least 2 years as a master sergeant. Now, to be honest with you, 2 years as a master, can it be enough? It depends on the job, what you're doing, what your exposure is. People have different opinions about it. I have seen masters that after 2 years are ready to be seniors, and I've seen some that have been masters for 10 years. I'm like, yeah, you just ain't there yet. So it's really dependent upon the individual. But the reg says minimum 2 years as a master sergeant before you're even eligible to become a senior. And 8 years time of service. So, there's that. And this is something specific for our senior master sergeants, our E8s, you need a conferred associate's degree. I'm going to touch on this for a minute. For a while, you needed to have your CCAF, which is your Community College of the Air Force Associate's degree. They changed that because you had people who are like doctors, legit had PhDs or postgraduate degrees, but didn't have a CCAF. And like, well, you're not ready for it. You need your CCAF. It's like, I have a doctorate or a master's or bachelor's, but you need this one specific degree. They changed it. You're no longer required to have your CCAF. So that's a change. You just have to have an associate's degree, which I get it. You want them to have a certain degree of education beyond just like the bare minimum. Now, if all you do is just like for my career field, if all you do is just, if you make it to master sergeant, you probably need less than like 7 classes to get your associates. Most master sergeants have their associates already. There are some that wait till they get there, some of the older guys or even some of the younger guys who just don't care. But if you want to be a senior, you got to have an associate's. Point blank, period. Ain't no 2 ways away about it. And it says confer. So you can't say, well, I'm done, but it ain't been finished. No. You need to have it done, signed, sealed, delivered. It's over with. But I strongly advise further education. But I'm big on education. Anyway, as I get sidetracked. Now, for E9, the top of the food chain, that third roof, the house is complete. There is, as one of my chiefs tells me, there is no E10. Like, once you've made it, you made it. I mean, there's command chief and there's chief master, but those are, if you consider them, this is not where you have that conversation, but it's E9. It's the top of the food chain. That requires, at minimum, a 9 skill level. You have to have your 9 skill level. You got to know what you're doing, and you got to know not everything, but most things. It's not too often you hear chiefs say, I don't know about something relating to their job. Chiefs know their job. They're the person everybody goes to. And that 9 skill level states that, hey, I know my job. I know what's entailed. I can supervise people. I'm a manager of managers. I got it. I get it. I'm locked in. I'm dialed in. Things change. The world changes. AFIs change. Jobs change. But you need at least a 9 skill level. 10 years time of service. You need to have been in service for at least a decade to be a chief. I've never met a chief that had 10 years time of service. Never. And the next point is why. You also need 14 good retirement years. Now let me kind of not explain this in detail, but go over it. A good year means that in the reserves, you had enough retirement points, enough participation points where it was a good year. It's like you're going to have someone who, because of their medical squadron, misses a year. They were just sidelined. They didn't come to UTAs. They didn't have their annual tours, and they didn't have a good year. You got to have 14 good years. That's where you're coming to UTAs, you're doing your annual tour, you're actively participating, you're growing, developing, teaching, learning, coaching, all that stuff. Like, those are good years. You need 14 of them. Theoretically, could you be a chief after 14 years? In theory. Does it happen? I won't say it hasn't, but I've never seen it. And I don't know anyone who has. Like, a 15-year chief is like, man, you got to have like a battery in your back. You got to be, you got to be hot. You got to be, high speed, whatever euphemism or saying you want to use. You got to be a cut above. It don't happen too often, realistically speaking. It just don't. Not to say it can't, but it just don't. And lastly, you need to have completed the chief orientation course, or if you're in the reserves, it's the Chief Air Force Reserve Command Chief Orientation Course and the associate's degree or higher from a nationally accredited or regionally accredited academic institution. Basically, there's a class you go to before you become chief, and you got to have your degree. I mean, it's that simple. But yeah, that's what you need to get into the top 3. Again, that's where the conversation begins. That is the bare minimum. If you are meeting any of these bare minimums at this level, it's not up for a conversation. You're pretty much not gonna be part of the conversation. And I say that that's the bare minimum, and why it doesn't matter or why it's not enough to get you in the doors. Let's say everyone meets the bare minimum. They start looking at other things. Well, how many awards do you have? You have no achievement medals, no commendation, no MSMs, none of that stuff. Now, that's not as to say those are determinants, but they're factors they consider. Because you could be a great airman, a great sergeant, have crap leadership. They don't recognize you for anything. So you don't have any awards next. I know a senior NCO like that. Fantastic sergeant, just his leadership was trash his entire career. So he doesn't have the recognition that he should. But I can tell from working with him, he's squared away. He's that guy. And he's a senior NCO, so that speaks volumes. Or they may look at EPRs, your listed performance reports, what you're changing. But if everybody meets the bare minimums, and this guy's a 5, and this guy or gal is a 3 or 4, well, maybe this guy's better, or this gal's better. And they look like you have to be current for fit to fight. Current just means that you took your last test. You can be current with a failure, because you're technically current. I mean, you've failed, but you're current. And that's one of the things that they kind of tell you, but they don't tell you. So I say all that to say that there are minimums to be a part of the conversation. Like meeting these will just get you in the door. You may not sit down, you may not be at the table, you may not be part of the conversation, but at least you get in a room. So that's it, man. I try not to make these too long, too drawn up, because I hate editing. God, I'm terrible at it. I gotta get me an editor. And this video is brought to you by nobody. Of course, it's not brought to you by. But anyway, that's it. That's how you get into the top 30. My name's Larry. Not just a veteran banker. You're a veteran banker.